wherever you want to sit. One right there. Thank you. All right, guys, we're going to have to get started. Everybody else can just file in at the back, because I'm already behind schedule. So I want to get the show on the road. So, welcome to the 4th annual WinOps conference and Devops on Windows. 4 years after starting this event, when people told me that you can't do DevOps on Windows, so we said, screw you, we'll start a whole community to prove that we can. And it's really great to see a fantastic turnout here for our 4th. It's our 3rd time here at Keynote. So yeah, really glad. A 2nd year of having the 2-day events. Who came for the workshops yesterday? Yeah, great. Everybody enjoyed them? Yep, excellent. Yeah, the feedback after was really good. So obviously I need to turn my speaker on. Oh, sorry, one thing I must say before we get started is that did you know that a 1-day travel card from Swindon in Wiltshire to London Zone 6 costs £140? And the owner of the travel card, who would probably like to get home today, so if you travelled in from Swindon and it cost you 140 quid, which is, thank you very much for spending that much money to come in, but your travel card is in my pocket, so please come and collect it before you leave. If you travelled from Swindon, come and collect your travel card. So yeah, very quickly, obviously we've got to thank all of our sponsors, Chef Accenture, Redgate, Docker, Octopus Deploy, Chocolatey, Squared Up, Amazon, Devops Group, and Prism Digital. Obviously, they fund a lot of this to make sure we can keep the ticket price down, particularly the cost of the workshops and stuff like that. So please go and talk to all the sponsors. They've got lots of swag, lots of t-shirts, lots of mugs, lots of pens, lots of chocolate in the case of Chocolatey. Most important thing, obviously, is the Wi-Fi. If you're not already connected to the Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi is pretty good. So quickly take a photo of that, but it's pretty easy. We love code. Health and safety. Obviously, the venue is on 2 floors, so be careful going up and down the stairs. Where we're going to be actually doing all the events is the 2 main rooms here and the 3rd larger room, and obviously the room that we're in now. This room shift over here is a little breakout room for one-to-one meetings. It's got some comfy chairs, so if you want to have a chat to the speakers afterwards, if you want to have a chat to the vendors, if you want to have a chat to the Devops Group recruitment team, and further your career in DevOps by joining us, that's the place to go and have a chat, and we're going to be doing video interviews in the last room. Toilets. There are toilets on the ground floor in that square in the middle, and there are toilets right behind that wall. So, there are toilets on both floors. Don't be too worried if you're not upstairs or downstairs. Emergency exits are marked in red. In the unlikely event of a fire alarm, those of you who were here for the workshop day last year know that we actually ended up for like half an hour out in the gardens behind. Somebody will gather you out, but there are emergency exits on every level to get you out. So in case of emergency, just follow the instructions of the people from Keynote. Social media hashtag, just WinOps. Agenda, obviously, basically the way it's structured today is that there's 2 sessions, then a coffee break, then there's 2 sessions, then a lunch break, and then 2 sessions, then a coffee break, then 2 sessions, and then we get stuck into the drinks. 2 keynotes today, this morning. ASOS telling the continuing story of their transformation. So we're going to be a 2-hander, one person sort of more representing dev, one person more representing ops, which I think is really good. And then Raj is going to tell his story about sort of a DevOps transformation at BAE Systems, which is an interesting one because there's actually not a lot of automation in that one. So I think it's important people to understand that there's more to maybe the story than just doing the automation. And then we've got lots and lots of great tracks. Just one thing, the 2 speakers from Amazon have switched. So if you're looking at the tracks and you want to go to the Amazon talks, they are now in the opposite order, okay? Because one of the speakers has to get away early to get a flight back. That's basically the afternoon. Lots of good stuff. if you're ever worried about what the things, obviously you've all got the agenda in your bag, but there is that quick link there, so if you ever need it, bit.ly WinOps 18. Code of conduct, TLDR, don't be a jerk, but it's more than that. Be respectful for everybody, be open, you know, change your body language so you actually go and have a conversation with somebody you haven't met before. Just try and have an inclusive, fun, friendly, interesting, passionate conversation about, you know, what you care about. But if you have any concerns, come and see me, come and see anybody wearing a Devops Guys shirt, or come and see any of the staff from CodeNode. And did I mention our sponsors? Okay, let's go. Without further ado, I will introduce you to the guys from ASOS.
I've got a clip. That's right. Just need the. Oh, we're there. Good. Excellent. Cool. We're good.
Good to go?
Yes.
All right, let's go.
Yeah. Hi. So, welcome to today. This is not our day jobs talking, so we apologise now if we're not the most fluid people as we go. Today's talk, we're going to talk a bit about one of our platforms today. Scott represents that, we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's about moving one of our kind of big monolithic applications up into the cloud and what that means for us as a company.
Yes, we thought it would be fun to introduce each other. So this is Ian. He's been at ASOS about 10 years. He's one of the veterans of the organisation. He's really always been involved in the DevOps side of things and the ALM side of things. A couple of little known facts about Ian is he's about an 8th dan in karate, so that kind of helps him with his influence and skills around the building. And he's also the president of the Porsche Boxster Association as well. That's an in-joke.
Thank you very much, Scott. And this is Scott Frampton.
Wanker.
He wanted that up there, not me.
That's a lie.
So Scott's worked for ASOS for over 5 years. He's been a massive fan of the DevOps work we've been trying to do, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. He's really been a keen ally across quality, but also DevOps. And he's worked with some really good companies, some really good solid engineering companies before that. As you can see, he's got a penchant for onesies. What you didn't know is that Scott's actually the lead model for our Mankini range. And he's second only to Idris Elba in line from the next James Bond.
You're an idiot.
We didn't tell each other what we were going to say about that today. So these are some stats about ASOS. Who's heard of ASOS? Awesome. Who's got ASOS on their credit card this month? Oh.
Whose wife or children have ASOS?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because that means either you're a hip, trendy 20-year-old something, or you've got kids that are. My wife basically fills mine up entirely. We get a good discount. So as you can see, I'm not going to talk through the stats apart from the last one. Obviously we're big, we're getting bigger, but the big numbers are the one on the end, the 25% year-on-year growth. And that's what's really driven our DevOps journey over the last 5-6 years, really. The scale of which we're operating has forced us to think about DevOps and forced us to think about how we scale our operation, how we meet the needs of our customers. Because quite frankly, if we hadn't have done that, our business wouldn't exist today. Another thing, big thing, Black Friday. About 4 or 5 years ago, Black Friday really wasn't a thing for us, as it wasn't for most retailers in the UK. We had our traditional sale periods. We had what we called the LBD week, which was the first week of December, which is the little black dress week. And that was when every woman went out and bought her party dress just after the last payday. And we had another traditional Christmas sale, that kind of kicked in at Boxing Day through to January. About 4 years ago, our American cousins introduced Black Friday to the UK. And basically the website just about stood up. Most other retail companies was bombed. We just about stood up. But since then, we kind of made it our mission to continually improve, to continually stay ahead of that curve. So that actually, we're now driving towards a situation where we're trying to make Black Friday just a business as usual day. We're trying to get it to the point where it really is nothing for us. At the moment, it is quite a big event, but that's what we're trying to get to when we try and work through all this work. So, before we dig into Scott's story and the particular platform, I want to talk a bit about the broad picture of ASOS. I've done several talks. I talked here last year about our journey then and where we were with it. So I'm just going to kind of compress that down a little bit just to give you a quick picture. Sorry about the graphics, that's the company standard. So the first bit was when we started our journey, kind of a V1 of ALM. We started this about 5-6 years ago. At the time, we were quite small. For those of you who know ASOS, our growth has been exponential. So 5 years ago, we only had about 6 teams. To give you a context, we've got about 80 teams now. So we had around about 6 teams, didn't have a lot of money. There wasn't a really great DevOps tooling out there to support what we wanted to do. So we developed our own solution. It was kind of a PowerShell Saki-based solution. It was extensible. It was kind of build once, deploy many. So it had some of the good features of DevOps tooling in there. However, we never quite got it right. It was black box to the teams. They didn't like it. They didn't want to extend it. And even though it got us quite a way, and I'll show you where it got us to in a minute, it was never quite where we wanted it to be, and it still created kind of an us and them culture between the dev teams and the kind of the DevOps function. Secondly, a big factor in our growth and our change has been the Azure and re-architecture. So about 3-4 years ago, we started to dabble in Azure. Again, as a company, we could see we needed to expand. We didn't want to stay in one data center, so we started to dabble with Azure and also look at kind of the options that gave us. As we went into a microservice world, obviously we could start to look at much more options around how you solve those problems. And it was really great for us. I think the challenges for us, though, was we kind of went in there organically. And as a result, we've had some challenges, which we continue to have as an organization, and some opportunities that it's generated for us as well. Parallel to that, we kind of formed the idea of platforms or product teams. I think they're kind of, both those terms are used in the industry. These guys had the responsibility for now delivering code, but also looking after that code end to end in its life cycle. So for the first time, we didn't have project teams that were throwing code over the wall to operations. These guys knew how to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, start to actually solve the problems that they had. And that kind of generated a different thinking in the teams. All these things together kind of led me to work with the organization to look at what became of our V2 of Azure. And we did this in the traditional ALM way. We looked at people, process, and tools. Now, we're going to talk a bit more about that in a minute, so I'm not going to go into that yet. But it was kind of a game changer for us in what we did. We also wrapped a big competency function around it. So to help the teams to improve, we have a competency function that exists for our BAs, our software engineers, our DevOps guys, and all the main disciplines that we operate in. And that's there to help try and move the company on in its professional ability. And finally, shared services. I'm passionate about the fact you need to have a shared service function within a tech function. You can't give everything to the platforms. There's too much self-interest going on there. You need people to look after your cross-cutting concerns, to look after the enterprise needs. So we really started to drive that side out of the conversation as well. And that's, again, something we'll talk about quite a lot today. These are the results of what we've done over the last 5-6 years. So way back when we started kind of this journey in 2011, that's about as far as I can remember back, we did 20 releases, and they were the 20 most painful releases of my life. Most of them involved rollbacks. All of them were overnight or weekends. They involved lots of people, and generally you were fixing stuff, as you went. I'm sure absolutely everybody in this room has been through at least one of those releases in their life. What you can see now, though, is obviously this year we've just done about 3,000 releases. So that's a 148-fold increase since we started the DevOps program. We started our ALM V2 program around here when we started the new tooling. So even within that, we've got a 9-fold increase. In fact, in the last week, we did 115 releases. So we're now well on towards beyond 5,000 releases this year. So our growth just continues to just go higher and higher and higher. So, Scott.
Can I have the thing? Oh, lovely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the content platform. And any excuse to break out this graphic that we got. This goes out of our release communications every week to our various stakeholders. Every week, without fail, released through Octopus and sent out to numerous people, but it wasn't always like that. There is a 90s hip-hop reference there as well, and I was going to try and thread that through the whole presentation, but I don't want to spend too much time in PowerPoint, so that's about all you're going to get on that score. Content platform team, CPT. So what is content at ASOS? There's two sides to that. So content is a commercial proposition at ASOS. Content can drive sales. Content is used to drive sales. It's critically important from our brand perspective. We run pages like the home pages, article pages, navigation structures. It really is a fundamental part of the user experience. So when we talk about content, we think about it in those terms. We use Sitecore, so show of hands who in the audience has heard of, used, sworn at, enjoyed using Sitecore. Oh, not many actually. Go on, put them up. Okay.
It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, isn't it?
Yeah. So we use Sitecore. So it's been in the building for about 5 years now. You know, you think about Sitecore, you think, oh, out of the box stuff. You can just install it on a couple of VMs and you're good to go. But when you start thinking about scale and you start thinking about high availability and 15 million active customers across the world, it becomes a lot more complicated. So this is a kind of a view of our end state. It's deliberately blurred because Ian runs one of our security teams, so we didn't want to get him fired by showing them, you know, intimate details of our infrastructure architecture. But this is effectively what we're deploying every time we deploy. So you've got, from a content perspective, the concepts really are around publishing and indexing and delivery of content and security and all of those kind of things. So this is effectively our state. I'm not going to go too far into that, but I just wanted to give you a kind of an indication as to how big our content management infrastructure and application footprint is. So off-the-shelf product Sitecore, it's got its many qualities. When we started using it, we were initially using version 6.6 and we had it on an on-premise data center about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
We had a small external team within the building maintaining Sitecore and kind of building some of the bits and pieces out of it. But the work they were doing was kind of largely project-based, so very short timelines, not really a lot of emphasis on how to build it, how to deploy it, how to test it, and releases in particular, and the deployment process involved with releases, it was very difficult. And as Ian mentioned earlier, subject to a number of rollbacks and various other issues. I think generally they were working on around 4 releases a year, and invariably each one of those, there were some challenges with it. And often, as is the case with these situations, is when you have a challenge with a software system, the thing that gets blamed is the biggest thing. So Sitecore was getting the blame. So what do we do? Well, what did the team do at the time? And purely, totally respect and understand this is the way you solved everything 3 or 4 years ago is just to move it all to the cloud. You know, that was going to solve it all. But the trouble is, you know, if you've got a team, a group of really dedicated individuals, but actually aren't set up to succeed, they didn't have the ASOS engineering leadership structure around them, they didn't have the experience of Azure. The Azure platform was moving at a really fast pace. Sitecore itself wasn't actually built at that time for Azure. It was, you know, it's a monolithic application. So just trying to lift and shift that from where it was out to Azure was a I think they call it a death march. It just wasn't going to work. So again, at that time, because the team were focusing so much on trying to get that out, they weren't delivering features. So again, that kind of compounded the issues with the business as to, you know, what's Sitecore doing for us? We're not delivering. We're not able to satisfy our customers both internally and externally. So it was coming to a bit of a crossroads, and really it was a little bit of this. Sitecore was getting a bad name in the building. And was kind of banging on the door in this place. So what did we do? We took a brave decision, and to quote one of Ian's personal heroes, Vanilla Ice, we did.
He's making me say this. Stop, collaborate, and listen.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun,
Yeah. Thanks for the laugh.
We worked hard on that.
Yeah. So what did we do? We stopped. As an organisation, we stopped. We said, you know what? What we're trying to do at the moment to move this on-premise application to Azure with the current version isn't going to work. It was kind of easy to make that decision because it was blatantly obvious, but also timing and context played a part. So as Ian mentioned earlier, there was a rising maturity of Devops as a culture and as a concept and as a set of patterns and practices, and also there was a rising or the evolution of the Azure platform. So we decided, you know, let's give it one more go, but let's actually do it right. So a new management team was brought in, an ASOS management team, to kind of own the content platform and turn it actually into a platform. So a platform lead was brought in, a solution architect was brought in, and we started building the team up. Now, historically, a principal software engineer, which is what I am, tends to get involved in projects late in the day to kind of fix things and help troubleshoot. But what was compelling to me about this was we were actually effectively, in a way, almost going to be able to start from a blank slate. It's kind of like we're going to abandon the notion of migrating what we've got to the cloud. What we're going to say is, let's start fresh over here and we'll migrate piecemeal. So that was really important because it really gave us a kind of a chance to all get together and listen to each other and understand exactly what all of our separate priorities were. The delivery lead has a priority in terms of delivering features quickly to the business. Engineering, we have a priority on telemetry and build automation and test automation. The architect has his priorities as well. So we kind of set out to really respect each other's points of view, and that is something that we carried through and have carried through for the last few years, and it's vitally important because it sets the tone in the team that everyone feels they have a voice, which I think is a real important part of DevOps and the whole DevOps culture. It's about culture, less than the tools and that sort of thing. So what do we do? Yeah, our top goal was to create a world-class software engineering team. Now, it may or may not surprise people to know that I'm not actually a software engineer. How it happened that I was involved in Sitecore is that someone said to me, didn't you work on Sitecore 6 or 7 years ago? And I said, yeah, I think so. There you go. So that was my involvement in the story. But what we came together and talked about was and decided to do or kind of set the tone in a way in that we wanted to become a world-class Sitecore engineering team. And I make the point about a Sitecore engineering team because when you're building for scale and high availability, there's no such thing as out of the box. There's no such thing as just installing something and leaving it there. You have to build for failure, multi-region, VMs, all manner of different technologies that we had to build. So we wanted to start with 4 main goals in mind. The first one, and there is some animation on this slide that I did myself, so I want that acknowledged from the engineers in the room. Delight our customers. So as I mentioned earlier, we'd gone through a phase where we weren't really delivering for the business, and we weren't really delivering for our authors as well. So fundamental part of whatever we did is we needed to ensure we could establish multi-stream delivery so that we could work on features, at the same time we could commit to our build automation and test automation and all that side of thing. We needed to be able to scale and stay current. One of the issues we had in the past was that the version of Sitecore we were on, we had hacked it apart so much that we couldn't actually upgrade it. The time it would have taken to try and upgrade what we did, as I mentioned earlier, was impossible. So we wanted to make sure that we could always scale and always stay current. The third thing goes without saying, if you want to satisfy your customers and scale, you have to invest in automation, and that's what we did. So the fourth thing was one of the issues we had in the past is, and one of the hardest journeys it was to take the engineering teams on was the notion of telemetry and ownership, and the fact that you're not throwing your software over the fence to someone else, you're the one that's going to be called. So we wanted to be able to proactively monitor what we're delivering. So that was it, really. But that's our initial goals, but I'm going to hand back to Ian for a bit on this.
Thanks, Tommy. Okay, so we're going to talk about what I talked about earlier on, people, process, and tooling now. We're going to kind of split that into kind of the enterprise level and then specifically at the content level. But I'm going to start backwards. I'm going to start with tooling. We all know that DevOps is not a tooling conversation. This is about people and practice, about culture and how we drive things through. However, tooling does make life a hell of a lot simpler when you're trying to drive some of these other things through. It helps you to kind of implement some of those ideas and some of those changes in a much, much simpler way. So tool choices were really important for us. We picked VSTS, or Azure Devops, as it now is, TeamCity and Octopus as our main stack. We did that for a couple of reasons. The first was, actually, it's played nicely with our stack at the time. We're predominantly a .NET company, we still are. We're predominantly a Windows company, we still are at the moment. And we were predominantly going to be a cloud company, which obviously we still are. So it fitted all nicely in those, but also it would allow us to extend as we go into more non-.NET areas, and if we went into Linux, it would also support those things going forward. So that was really important tool choices for us. The second reason that was really good for us is actually when we were trying to look to change the tools, the engineers themselves were coming to us and going, we've used this in other companies. We think these are really cool, they're easy to adopt, et cetera, et cetera. So actually, giving teams tools that they were already asking for made life a hell of a lot simpler. Because if you give them what they asked for in that one, when you then have the slightly harder conversation to say, actually, we'd like you to change your practices, or we'd like you to, kind of improve in these areas, it's a little bit easier because they've already got something that is theirs that they can own. We made a really, really solid decision to make provisioning and deployment first-class citizens. So up to now, we kind of separated those two. Our infrastructure was one, and our deployment was another. We, really started to bring DevOps together at this point. We said, no, they're first-class citizens, and you will deal with them at the same time. You will deal with them in the same way, and you'll deal with them within the same pipelines. And that was a really big decision that we kind of drove through. And lastly, we kind of made it mandatory. If you wanted to play at ASOS, this is the way you would work. We had to do that to make sure that everyone got on the same train, and we were all going in the same direction. It was really key for us. Again, it was kind of hard messages in some cases, but we felt it was really important that actually we all stuck to the same agenda to drive this through. Otherwise, we'd never have delivered it in the way we did.
Yeah, and now how that manifested itself out in the delivery environment. So as Ian mentioned earlier, Ian sits in the kind of central competency teams. I sit out like many of the other principal engineers in the delivery environments working with the teams. And how that standardization helped us was historically developers in the organization didn't want to learn our custom framework for building and deploying software because they wouldn't be able to use it anywhere else. It's not something you'd put on your CV. Oh, I know how to use the ASOS ALM framework. Doesn't mean anything. So being able to standardize on industry standard tooling was a really important thing, and it helped us to kind of get buy-in from the developers that what they were going to be learning was actually of value to them. So it wasn't just about making them more rounded in their skill set, it actually had value. Team City and Octopus in particular, and certainly for the content platform, where we have Sitecore, SQL, VMs, Solr, Java, believe it or not, there's so many different technologies and tool sets that the flexibility that Octopus gave us was really important and a real game changer for how we could carve up and deploy Sitecore, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But the other key thing is, if you consider the fact that often when we're delivering software, there's always trade-offs and compromises between engineering and architecture and security and delivery leadership. So the fact that we had a central competency that was building a lot of this stuff anyway and we could just reuse it, that made it a lot more of a simple conversation as well. That really did help. So yeah, that from a tooling perspective was something that kind of put us on a good foundation. But really what it comes down to is processing as well, processes. So there's the central processes and our ones.
Yeah, so from a process point of view, this was also probably the first place we went to, oddly, really, before we got to our tooling conversation. This was really important. We had to prioritize on what we thought were the most important areas. So we went across the teams, we looked at what they were deploying, what was the most common kind of technologies they were deploying. Things like for us, it was cloud services, VMs, SQL databases, that kind of stuff in our first world. And we focused on those. So we focused it on the key things that would give us the most value the quickest. That wouldn't necessarily mean we met the needs of every team, but it did mean we could scale this across as quickly as we could. We then had to rationalize these. So we had to really work with those teams and actually understand which ones we wanted to focus on, which ones we felt were the most important, and actually then make the solutions to those as simple as possible, so that actually they could be reused in the most cases as possible. So again, we could get that scale out. And finally, the alignment. So we had to have some interesting conversation with teams about convincing them, encouraging them, coercing them, as Scott said, hitting them, to actually get them to go in the right direction. To actually say to them, look, if you want to deploy cloud services, this is the pattern you're going to follow, this is the way you're going to do it, this is what it's going to give you. So that actually everybody could get that same loveliness very, very quickly. We didn't have all these snowflakes everywhere that we didn't have to manage going forwards. However, against that was the enterprise versus platforms conversation. So I'm guessing probably a lot of you have this fun in your companies if you're of a certain size or a certain maturity. So platforms have really risen in the organization, and they've basically been given the mission to say, it is your job to make sure you deliver everything that your customer wants. You're really there to delight your customer, and you can do anything you like to make that happen. On the other side, there's the enterprise that says, well, you've only got so much money and you've got to work in a certain way, and we've all got to play nicely with each other. And those two things can come into tension quite a lot and continue to do so. It's a challenge for us at ASOS, and it's something we keep driving towards. We're trying to put more and more power in the hands of the platforms because they are the right people, they are closest to their business, they can make some of the key decisions. However, you want some consistency across your approach as well. And so actually we had to have some really interesting conversations about what is the best way to do this that may be suboptimal for the platform, but was better for the enterprise. And that's been a really big challenge for us, say, for the last couple of years, and will continue to be for the next couple of years at least.
And from a content perspective, or generally from a platform perspective, there's, as many of us will know in the room, there's no silver bullet. There's no easy way to deploy large-scale solutions on the cloud, especially when the cloud's moving so fast and teams have varying different dependencies and priorities and that sort of thing. So I want to talk now about kind of the organizational structure of our platform. I could very easily have talked about how we broke apart Sitecore first, so I don't want you to think that by talking about the organization first that we've mapped the organization to the tooling or anything like that around Conway's Law, but I'll talk about the organization first. So at the moment, this is how our team is structured. I'm just focusing on the engineering and architectural side of things. We have delivery managers, we have QA leads, we have BAs and that sort of thing. But we needed, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure that we could deliver multiple streams concurrently. We needed to be able to focus on the health of the product and the health of the platform at the same time as delivering features. So we carved the kind of the group of people up, and we're at around 50 now, but that's been built up over time into various different delivery streams, and this is a fairly common pattern. And one of the challenges we instantly came up against was knowledge sharing, and the fact that because Sitecore is a monolithic application, and because there are a number of cross-cutting concerns that we had to make sure that we got right, we needed to make sure that all the teams were following those standards and following the kind of the same patterns and principles. Otherwise, we were going to create 4 or 5 different little silos. So I think it's not inaccurate to say that I ranted it in, and many others many times, about the fact that the developers, bless them, and I can say this because I am one of them, just don't talk to each other. They sit on Slack and they Slack each other, but they don't actually go away from their desks and actually say, how are we going to make this thing better? So that was a real challenge for us, and we solved that by making the lead software engineers and the teams, and effectively encouraging everyone to really feel that they could speak up and they could actually take themselves out of the delivery environment, go away, think about things, how to make things better, come back, and we'd enable and empower people to make those changes. The other thing is, we call it kind of the 80-20 rule, the 90-10. You might have had it as well, where as a delivery team, you might do your sprint planning. You say, okay, 10% of this sprint planning we're going to dedicate to tech debt, and 90% we're going to dedicate to feature development. Now, even though we started this new platform with the intention and the kind of the agreements between engineering and architecture and delivery leadership that we would all kind of work together, as Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. So, you know, thanks again. It didn't quite work because we hadn't delivered on some of our commitments to the business for so long that there was pressure that we couldn't ignore. So what we ended up doing is, you'll see this golden thread on the side there, is we took a decision to actually instate a permanent stream which was committed entirely to the platform. So to the build automation, to test automation. They're not the only people that did it, but they're the ones that would always be committed to doing that sort of work, so that you always had a sense that however busy the platform was, however busy and however many demands there were on the teams, we were always going to make sure that we were never going to end up in the same position where we couldn't deploy or we couldn't scale, or that people didn't feel that they had pride or a sense of, engineering ownership of what they're building. So the Golden Thread team is something that I think has been a fundamental part of our success, for want of a better term. We kind of make it also a bit of it's not an aspirational thing, but when you work in the Golden Thread team, you're just doing out and out pure engineering. You're not expected, or not. You have no demands from a kind of BA or anything like that. You're looking at a set of priorities, and the way we kind of prioritize is that as a PSC, I'm the product owner of the technical backlog. And the reason for that is not to kind of order the team and tell them what to do, although there has been occasions for that every now and then. It's about giving them a bit of critical distance. Often when you're immersed in the detail and immersed in the team, sometimes you can't see what's going on because you're so close to the problem. the benefit of being slightly out of the detail is you can kind of look at a whole situation and say, do you know what, you've got gaps there, and you've got gaps there, and you've got gaps there. Let's see if we can work together to get this stuff work through. And developers like that. It really gave them a sense of, you know what, we know that there's nothing we have to do that we feel uncomfortable about. We've got a route to kind of have our voices heard. And that's not to say that the other lead parts of the leadership team don't hear, because they do. They really do. But this has just been a real kind of fundamental part of our ability to deliver at scale and with repeatability. So on to the next bit. So there's a lot going on this slide, but I didn't want to go too deep into it. So Sitecore, the version at the time when we started on this second journey was version 8. And that had moved a fairly long way in terms of being a bit more cloud ready, but it still wasn't quite there. So we had to find a way to carve up the application into different layers so that we could, and vertical slices so that we could work on them independently in the delivery streams and then stitch them back together. Now, because of some of the challenges with the product at the time, and it isn't a criticism, it's just because things move on and things move fast, the only way we could do that, we couldn't really repeat the mistakes of old by looking into the product and hacking it apart and customizing it and chopping bits off of it, because that would have broken our kind of aspiration to always be able to upgrade and stay current. So we had to find a different way, and that's where Octopus and ARM and DSC and some fairly inventive PowerShell usage helped us. In fact, it was the game changer. It really helped us carve up the estate, carve up this monolith into kind of discrete components that we could layer on top of each other so that when we deployed a feature, we could do that in isolation, teams could do that in isolation. Now, the most important part of that, and one of the other big challenges we had, was because teams worked in isolation every now and then, and they had their own test environments, and they had their own kind of ways of working to a degree, something that we were always trying to address. We had an issue of integration. We had an issue where when it all came back together, issues, inconsistencies, and oh, you've overwritten my changes, I've overwritten your changes, and that sort of thing. So we introduced and it's not rocket science. I mean, we've all done this. We introduced an integration test suite, and that was great. So we put that together, and that sits in the integration level. So whenever teams commit to master, goes through there. We run a suite of tests, and that was good for a little while. And then over a period of time, it came to those tests are a little bit brittle, and those tests fail every now and then, but that's all right. That should be fine. And it was really pissing me off, to be honest. Sorry for the bad language. It was something that was going to really undermine everything we did. All of our aspirations for continuous delivery were going to be undermined if we didn't treat test failures as zero tolerance to them. So this is our test dashboard, and that's one of our engineers who I promised to give fame and glory to. If there's recruiters in the room, stay away from him. But this is our test dashboard. And after about a month or 2 months of coming in every morning and kind of seeing red blotches all over the place, I thought, how do we get through to them? How do we get them to understand that this is important? That without these tests passing every time, 100% reliable every time, then anything else is just hard. Continuous delivery, and certainly continuous deployment, is a pipe dream. So I think the onesie of me in a lion suit earlier probably gave away the fact that I really like cats, and this was actually a coincidence. So I thought, how do I get through to this bunch? So I said, if you imagine this as a back garden, and it's all nice and green, if I see any red, I equate that to a dead kitten. And that somehow, you've got to use whatever tools you have, that somehow changed perspectives. And now we have a bit of terminology within our domain around dead kittens. It sounds morbid, but it comes from a place of love. So, it really does. So we strive at all times to have no dead kittens. If there are dead kittens, a report sent out, not a formal report, but we've got a dead kitten over here. This is the issue. It's because of a failing service. We're looking at it, and we're getting it rectified by X. And that's a commitment that everyone in the team has. We also don't run just tests in our integration environment. We run tests against production and pre-production and that sort of thing, so we can kind of bring some of that stuff back. But that's fundamental. Integration testing, zero tolerance for failure, no dead kittens. That's been really important.
So if you want to take that idea, feel free. So that leads us nicely onto the kind of the culture piece, which is the really important part of the conversation, and my clicker's decided to stop working. So that leads us nicely onto culture. That's a really good kind of way of driving that cultural change. So again, from a general point of view, from my perspective, DevOps is obviously not about the few, it's about the many. One of the things that we found is that we ended up we drove platform engineers out into the teams to stop the bottleneck of a central DevOps function. We made those platform engineers become kind of responsible for helping to get the teams into a better DevOps place, but hasn't necessarily worked in the way we kind of wanted it to, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it needs everybody to step up. It needs everybody to think about this. We need those lovely T-shaped individuals. We don't want everybody to be a DevOps expert. We'd be out of a job. But we do want everyone to have an awareness of it and to be able to contribute to that. For us, it is about autonomy. It's about trying to give the teams as much responsibility as they possibly can within their own team. So they don't need to go out to other functions, because other functions cause delays, they cause bottlenecks, they cause conflict, they cause friction. So ideally, we want to give as much as we can to the teams, but we need to be able to do that in a safe way. So getting them in the right cultural mindset, where it's actually they're thinking about these things naturally, means you don't need to step in. And that leads on to trust. Really, we need to get to the point where we trust those teams to do the right thing. I need to know that when they're about to develop a new feature, they thought about how they're going to release that. They thought about their HADR strategies. They thought about the security implications. They thought about deployability. All the things that we want to do, all the entities and all the kind of stuff that we think about. I need them to inherently know that they're going to go away and do that without having to go and audit them every 5 minutes and go and rat them on the wrist when they haven't. So for us, that's a really key thing for any cultural change that we need to try and drive through, is get teams to realise what that goal is. That actually, if they do the right thing, they can get this autonomy, they can get this trust that we want to get them to.
Yeah, and I think, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, culture has been so important in our team. I come from, I spent a bit of time, like many of us, I'm sure, in consultancy, and in not in all cases, but when I left the consultancy world, I felt that I was very much a deliver, get stuff out the door, people are resources, just arrange them and we'll get it out. And in joining ASOS, that's just not the case at all. It's completely different. And I have to say, it changed my mindset as well. So we focus really on empowering people and believe truly that happy and motivated and empowered people develop great software. And it's really stood up from our side of things. We invest an awful lot in a sense of strong camaraderie and a team ethos and a team identity. That picture's from when we built cardboard boats and sailed them along Camden Lock, which was a great day out. We have a day out every 3 months just to kind of build that sense of team and togetherness and that sort of thing. So that's really important. The other thing is we make it and we encourage the fact that it's safe to speak up and it's safe to fail and it's safe to try and be daring and innovate, as long as you're doing it from a position of, I want to try and make things better. And that's the question we get people to ask themselves. Is what I'm going to do going to make things better? And if you've got that aspiration, then who can criticise it? Sometimes things are going to go wrong, but that's it. The other thing as well is clear accountability. So especially when we started the platform, we found that during that initial forming phase, it was actually quite important to have strong leadership to say, this is where we're going, that's the direction, and this is the things we expect from you, but within that, do whatever you want, let's all work together. So people tended to like that in the team. They liked that kind of sense of, okay, we all know where we're going, and we all know what we're responsible for and accountable for. It just helped. But yeah, culture and people, without that, the tooling's irrelevant. That's what we found.
So, we're kind of getting close to time, but the key challenges and learnings. So again, from the enterprise point of view, as I said before, this is everyone's responsibility. We've got to drive this back into the teams. This is something that everybody should care about. DevOps is not is just down to the one platform engineer in the corner. It's not just up to the PSE to remind the teams. This is something that everybody has to do. Otherwise, we will fail. If we rely on central functions to deliver your code, you will fail. It is inevitable. For the scale that we're at, we've had to make this to a point where teams have to try and realise this message. And the other one for us is it's never done. Again, we've talked to companies that kind of think, oh, we got to the cloud, it's great, it's awesome. But you've got to realise that's the start of it. That's the real start of it. It is about continuous improvement. It's about constantly challenging yourselves to work out what is the next big issue, what is the next big problem we're going to come on, what's the next big opportunity. Also, the big things in the cloud is that the innovation never ends. For us, we're just about to go into Kubernetes. That will cause a major schism in the company for the next year, 18 months, where we start to move that stuff forward and get that right. So that's our next major big thing. And that stuff has got to be constantly evaluated and constantly, ideally from a metrics-based approach. So you can actually see what your problems are, you can go after them, and you can then see if you're successful.
Yeah, and from a team perspective, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and it's just a rehash of what I said earlier, is, again, all the tooling in the world doesn't help if you don't have people that are motivated and understand what they need to be doing, how they need to be doing it, and that they're bought into the journey. Not just team members, but leadership and stakeholders. They're bought into the fact that, if we're developing software, a period of our time is going to be dedicated to building the software in the right way, building it for scale, building it so we know what goes wrong and how we can support it and that sort of thing. The other thing, again, is to go back to the automation and the integration side of things. It just warrants saying over and over again, I think, is integration testing and solid and 100% reliable testing is just critical. Sometimes as well, taking the team on the journey around telemetry. I had the benefit of working for Skype before I worked at ASOS, so I got a real kind of good exposure to how important telemetry is. And taking the team on that journey was very hard because they couldn't really understand why we had to do all this logging and all this bloody app insights and all this stuff. Why do we need to? So we actually let them experience life without it for a little while. And that helped. Oh, actually now we see why this is important. So sometimes people need to feel a little bit of pain. It helps people learn in a nice, managed, controlled way. That's largely some of the key learnings.
You again.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We practiced this, honestly.
Smooth transitions. So where we are now, we are one of the largest in-house Sitecore engineering teams in the world. We're in with the Sitecore product teams directly, so we are really pushing the product to its absolute limits. We're on various kind of early adopter programs, and we were out at the symposium, Sitecore Symposium, their main conference a couple of months ago, talking about the things that we're doing at ASOS. So that's been a real achievement. We're doing releases every Wednesday without fail. We have a release train that goes out, and people can say, I want to release this, this, and this, and it goes out. So that's release agility and release predictability. This is one that I'm the most proud of, pretty much, is for a period of about 6 or 8 months, we had 0 incidents. And if you consider the complexity of the estate and the transient nature of Azure and the various different moving parts, that's just staggering. I don't know whether someone was hiding them or maybe not reporting them, but we had no incidents. And that was a real testament to the fact that if you commit to doing software delivery and engineering right, then the benefits, they're just blatantly evident. And no rollbacks, apart from one where Azure went down, so it wasn't really our fault. Yeah, that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, so just to wrap up the final slide, but on time's up, we'll get this quickly. So what's next for ASOS? So generally, from my point of view, more the opsy type world, things like automation governance. We want to really enable teams to go faster, but we want to do it safely. Now, even the most conscious person in the world is going to make mistakes. So from my side of the world, we're trying to build the safety nets into Azure through things like policies and some automation on that sort of side. So it's the teams will do inherently the right thing without having to need to police them. We're also looking at things like release management. So we're trying to improve our release management story constantly. We've already gone way beyond cabs for most stuff. With 115 released in a week, you can't do 115 cabs. So we've gone beyond that for most stuff. But what we're now trying to do is really trying to drive towards that continuous deployment. So actually automating that entire process. So operations get what they need, but also the developers have the minimum pain they can get. We want to drive DevOps culture into the team. So I talked about this before a little bit. We're kind of halfway there with this. We've got platform engineers in the teams, but the teams are still relying too heavily on those platform engineers to do too much of the work. So we need to drive that mentality deep into the teams so those platform engineers actually are a pure competency and they really can put themselves out of a job. That's what we're trying to drive towards. DevOps to Ops. Like many organizations, I'm sure when you started this journey, you've probably focused more on the engineering side of the function, the delivery side, because that's the sexy side. That's the side where you can sell it to the CIO and the CTO really quickly. We're working with the ops functions as well, because they've got tons of great knowledge. They've got tons of good processes and practices, but they haven't really moved on in the same way. So we're really focusing on them now to see how can we use automation, how can we use those agile approaches to help them to get better and actually evolve as well into the organization we need them to be. We're looking now at opening up the tool sets. So I was very adamant that we would stick to a described set of tool sets when we started this journey, because it gave us that acceleration, it gave us that consistency across all the platform teams. However, it's kind of horses for courses. One size does not fit all in this story necessarily, especially now we've branched out into lots of different kinds of technologies. We're going very heavily into machine learning and that kind of side of the world. And Octopus and Team City aren't necessarily the best tools for looking at those kind of areas. So we're now looking at, can we open up that tool set a little bit to actually enable the teams to use what is right for them, but under the right level of control and governance still. And finally, it's about that trust. We're really trying to continue to drive that trust message through. We really want to get to the point where we're absolutely confident that every team is going to do the right thing every time.
Yeah, for us, just to wrap it up really quickly, for us it's all about continuous optimization of our release story. So at the moment, to stand up an entire environment, it takes about 2 hours. We're looking to, ideally, the holy grail for us is zero downtime. We can just deploy and have zero downtime. And I mentioned zero downtime because when you have content management, you have authors, and you have editors, and you have published schedules. So zero downtime is actually quite a hard thing to achieve. But that's something that is the ultimate kind of goal for us is to be able to deploy with zero downtime. That actually will allow us to release every day or release every few hours. And finally, it's just more measures, more metrics, more insights, so we can kind of understand exactly, how our applications are behaving, how we can improve them, and how we can zero in on some of the areas that we need to improve. But yeah, like Ian said, it's never done. It's just an endless task.
We will put time for questions. I think we've run out of time. So if you want to kind of catch us afterwards, we'll be around most of the day. More than happy to talk about this. We've kind of hit the tip of the iceberg about what we've done. There's a lot of detail behind the journey we've gone on. So I'm more than happy to share that or invite you over to come and talk to us at ASOS to talk about stuff in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No worries.
Thank you.